Welcome back to another English Speaking Complete lesson, where today we're going to be looking at a really important aspect of English grammar, and it's all about sentence types, and it's all specifically about the compound and complex sentence. Now, don't let the names put you off. It's just really good to have some understanding of these types of sentences. And it may be that you're using them already without actually knowing. So let's take a look deeper at these types of sentences. Okay, before we go any further, we need to know about clauses. Now, sentences are made of smaller chunks of language, which we called clauses. And there are two types of clauses really that we use. We can really categorize further, but generally speaking, there are two types of clauses or parts of sentences that we need to know about. And that is independent clauses and dependent clauses. Now, especially within dependent clauses, there are different kinds of dependent clauses. But let's not stress about that. For now, all we need to know is there are independent clauses and dependent clauses. And these mixed together make up whole sentences. Okay, so what is an independent clause? An independent clause is a complete idea and sentence. It's a complete thought. It needs nothing else adding, really. If you just put a full stop at the end, that would be it. It would be a complete sentence. It's got everything it needs. For example, the music is very loud. That is one complete thought. It's got everything it needs. Dogs like to get lots of exercise. So I've got my subject dogs, and then we've got the verb like, and we've got kind of the object as well, what they like doing, exercise. It's going to rain tomorrow, I think. Okay, another complete thought and idea. It's going to rain tomorrow, I think. Independent clauses. We can add more detail if we want. It's going to rain tomorrow, I think, but possibly not. But if we just leave them at that, they're perfectly fine on their own. Dependent clauses are different, however, and you may have guessed it, it's not a complete idea. It isn't fully finished. It doesn't work on its own. It's generally used to add detail. A dependent clause needs an independent clause next to it, or it just doesn't work. For example, it seems very clear to me there's something missing. I'm not continuing with the sentence. It's not finished. It's a really lovely piece of language. It seems very clear to me. What? I haven't quite finished my sentence there. It's a dependent clause. When my sister arrives. Okay, and I'm still waiting for further information. It's not a complete idea. Who walked out of the park? Okay, so I need to know the subject. Who did this? So there we can see some examples of dependent clauses. And we can see that they don't work on their own. Now think back to this lesson's title, Compound and Complex Sentences. You may be thinking, why do I need to know about, independent and dependent clauses? How is this relevant to this lesson? Well, it is, and it's very important, and let me explain why. So compound and complex sentences are made using a variety of clauses. They may have some independent clauses, they may have some dependent clauses, and unless we know about the two different types of clauses, there's no point us looking at compound and complex sentences. It will all come together once I show you some examples and also define compound and complex sentences. So, compound sentence. This is two independent clauses joined with a connective. That's and, because, or, therefore. There are lots of different connectives that we can use. two independent clauses. We split them in half with a connective in the middle. Let's take a look at an example. My favourite pastimes are writing, and I also enjoy making videos. Okay, so in purple, we have one independent clause. My favourite pastimes are writing. Now, if I was going to have that on its own, I would say is writing, but I'm adding more detail. And I also enjoy making videos. That's in green is our independent clause, the second independent clause. In blue, we have the connective and we could use different connectives within this example. Here's another example. I loved visiting Ireland, but it's a pretty cold place too. Now we have in purple an independent, in green an independent, and we've used the connective but to show contrast. So it basically is used but to say that we're saying something different now. Ireland is awesome, but it's cold. I loved visiting Ireland, but it's a pretty cold place too. It's a pretty cold place. So there we have two examples of compound sentences, and we'll look at some more shortly in a live speaking video. Okay, complex sentence is slightly different. We have generally one independent clause and one dependent clause, and they are often, but not always, joined with a comma. In writing, I try and push students to use the comma as much as possible just in case, until they really get to the advanced stages of fluency. So one independent, one dependent, and the dependent clause can often come at the start or often come at the end. So which order they go in depends very much on the sentence that we're creating. So let's take a look at an example. My favourite pastime is writing, when I get the chance anyway. So we can see in purple, my favourite pastime is writing. Full stop, independent clause if I want. However, to add detail, comma, in red. When I get the chance anyway is a dependent clause. It doesn't work on its own. It doesn't finish a thought or a sentence. Okay, let's take a look at the next example. When summer arrives, I'm camping up in the national parks. Now, it could be argued in this last example that we might not need the comma, but I think it's still okay to use in this specific example. And of course, within speaking, we don't really need to worry about commas very much. When summer arrives, I'm camping up in the national parks. In blue, dependent clause, when, starting with when summer arrives. In purple, our independent, I'm camping up in the national parks. It's good that we have the dependent here, when summer arrives, or the independent clause is too general. I'm camping up in the national parks. That would probably leave people asking, if you said that, they'd probably be asking, okay, when, how, why, what? We need more detail for this. So dependent clauses can very much help independent clauses to give them some context, to give them a scenario and a situation to work in. Okay, let's jump into a live speaking video, and I'm just going to run through a few more examples for you and kind of around the topic of hobbies too. Okay, so we're going to begin with some compound sentences. And here is just a very, very short list of some connectives you can use to join those two independent clauses. Remembering that a compound sentence is two independent clauses split in the middle with a connective which joins them together. So here's a quick example around some sort of hobby, which is music. I really love playing the piano, and I'd also love to play the drums too. So there we can see those two independent clauses joined with and to add some extra information. And I'd love to play the drums too. So these two independent clauses work perfectly on their own. And is a pretty simple connective, but it's used all the time within English speaking and is a great way to add extra detail and add an extra independent clause in your speaking. Let's check out another example of a compound sentence. My father's a very kind man, although he works way too hard. There we've got two different independent clauses joined with although. My father's a very kind man, although he works way too hard. So we're adding these different sentences together, these fully formed thoughts, independent clauses, and we've used the connective although, which is used to show a slight contrast. So my father works very hard. My father is a very kind man, although. So something else, we need to add some more detail. He works way too hard. I wish he wouldn't work so hard. My father is a very kind man, although he works way too hard. So we've got that connective in the middle joining those two independent clauses. And now we've got a great example of a compound sentence. Okay, let's check out some examples for complex sentences now. I love playing chess, which I've done since I was a young child. So there we have an opening independent clause. I love playing chess. If we were writing it, we'd add a comma, which I've done since I was a young child. So we can start our dependent clauses with some of these W words too, which I've done since I was a young child. That wouldn't work on its own. That dependent clause really needs the opening independent clause. I love playing chess, which I've done since I was a young child. In fact, the dependent clause here is actually longer than the independent clause. I love playing chess. A simple independent clause. Add the comma, which I've done since I was a young child. So there we have a really good example of a complex sentence where the dependent clause adds so much more detail to the sentence. Using when, we can really open up our complex sentences with a dependent clause. When I work out, I really push myself hard. So there we have that opening dependent clause. When I work out, comma, if you were writing. When I work out, I really push myself hard. So we have an independent clause at the end. I really push myself hard. It's good that we've added that dependent clause, when I work out, or there just really isn't enough context within the sentence. When I work out, I push myself really hard. So that shows great teamwork between the dependent and independent clause to really give more detail within the speaking. And that when is a great way to open with a dependent clause. When I work out, when I travel, when I play guitar, and then follow on with an independent clause to really get an interesting structure in your speaking or even in your writing. Okay, so that was a run through of some examples of different compound and complex sentences. It's really important when you're writing that you understand how to use these different types of sentences, but it's just generally really useful across English language as well as in English speaking to understand what these structures are, as well as knowing that clauses make up parts of our sentences. Really useful bit of understanding for you, and you'll be revisiting that a lot throughout your English language learning journey. If you have any questions, do jump to the Q&A section. It'd be really great to hear from you.